This one is a long time coming. As a fan of world-building fiction akin to Lord of the Rings, I can't tell you how excited I was about reading Dune, especially because of its amalgamation of different and often underrepresented cultures and religions, all the while utilizing its creative naming mechanisms. From Zen Sunni to the Orange Catholic Bible, this combination of faiths spoke of the author Frank Herbert's plasticity and purpose in storytelling. Distance often offers perspective, and as such, this perspective lent itself to a sort of perennial approach to world religions, where their ultimate purpose could be distilled into the preface of the Orange Catholic Bible, avoiding the disfigurement of the soul. The reference material and Islamic elements, which are rare to see in fantasy and science fiction, especially at the time of its release, greatly interested me during my read, mainly because the world has, and continues to be, alienated from true dialogue from this perspective in popular discourse and media. I think Dune encapsulates the conflict between the proverbial West and Islam, and in this way is one of the best examples to examine this contention and its meaning in the world stage. Not to say there aren't a fair share of Buddhist and Catholic teachings, as well as many more depicted in the book. I do, however, find the core of the first book to rely heavily on Islamic traditions to set its stage, and in that vein, I'd like to explore some of the themes, symbols, and meaning of the book, and its reflection in current societal issues through the lens of Arnold Toynbee's Civilization on Trial and his study of history. It's hard to deny the influence of Toynbee's thinking given his popularity at the time of Dune's release, and I'll link some of the key aspects of Dune's story to the outcomes envisaged by Toynbee. So with that said, let's dive right in.
My desert. My Arrakis. My Dune.
Arnold Toynbee was a world-famous historian and scholar who made his mark through one of the most ambitious historical studies of modern times, analyzing the life cycle of civilizations.
Mr. Toynbee, just what is your theory of history?
Well, that's a large question. Well, I suppose I started off by finding I couldn't work with nations as units of historical study. Most people in our time work with nations. I found them too small and felt they were somehow fragments of something bigger which I had to reach after. So I reached after civilizations. For instance, not seeing things in terms just of American history or French history or Italian history, but seeing it in terms of Western history. And then,
widely read, his 10-volume work dissecting 26 civilizations, a study of history, sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and by 1947, he himself had become a household name, with an appearance on the cover of Times to cap his rock stardom in academia. The post-World War landscape had the Western world abuzz with anticipation of the end, with the looming potential of nuclear warfare now introduced into geopolitical discourse. And theorizing through his meditations in these volumes was Toynbee, recognizing the pattern and behaviors of ancient kingdoms whose mighty boasts were reduced to nothing but folklore by the sands of time.
as I thought that a number of them had broken down and gone to pieces, and that had happened to them on a certain pattern. But now that didn't make me a determinist, because it didn't make me believe that is bound to happen to every civilization, such as ours, which is still alive. But it did make me feel that there was a great challenge to any civilization that showed the symptoms of breaking down, as ours clearly does today.
Toynbee warns the Western world in his Civilization on Trial. Man cannot live by technology alone. When the ecumenical house of many mansions stands firmly on its own foundations, and the temporary Western technological scaffolding falls away, as I have no doubt that it will, I believe it becomes manifest that the foundations are firm at last, because they have been carried down to the bedrock of religion. For religion, after all, is the serious business of the human race.
Breakdowns of civilizations in the past and collisions with one another, you find yourself coming to the origins of the great religions of the world: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and so on. And in these last volumes especially, I've come to the conclusion that it's really the great religions that are the ultimate patterns in history and that probably have the future. So I started with civilizations as my first key to unlock the secrets of history, if one could unlock them. And I've come on to a second key, which I think takes one further, and that's the great religions.
Toynbee's vision of the technological scaffolding that holds Western society together breaking apart is realized in Herbert's Butlerian War, sparked due to the oppression of humanity by their thinking machines. This forces the world of Dune to return to a time before machine dominion, and this moment gives way to the creation of the Orange Catholic Bible, to reorient humanity to a religious and spiritual bent. That serious business that's described by Toynbee prior, the business of fate, meaning, and spirituality, are all explored in the novel.
But our plans are measured in centuries. We have other prospects, if he fulfills his promise.
After some time, the world of Dune reorganizes itself and again starts to battle for resources and technological advancement. Far removed from the Great War, these major houses now stand firmly under the banner of the Emperor, and thus continue the race for political and socioeconomic conquest.
Dude, like, oh my god, like, can we talk about, like, the political and economic state of the world right now?
Therein lies a tension between these great houses and the less advanced societies that have been plundered for their resources.
They ravage our lands in front of our eyes. Their cruelty to my people is all I've known.
The advanced societies using religion as a tool to control and conquer, carefully crafting narratives through their missionaria, so these less advanced nations are made subservient.
That means the Bene Gesserit has been at work here.
Planting superstitions.
Preparing the way, Paul. These people have waited.
Toynbee's Civilization on Trial serves as a warning to Western society. His argument in the work is that the downfall of the West will be its lack of understanding and alienation of the forces that stand opposed to its technological reign, in the same way that the missionaria was crafted to take advantage of the beliefs of the Fremen, but could not predict a level of belief that would allow them to take over the known universe. Technology can only stave off the inevitable, and if there isn't an equal amount of belief serving as a bedrock for civilization, argues Toynbee, they will be washed away by the current of time. And interestingly enough, Toynbee's warning reflects the tension between the great houses and the Fremen of Arrakis. Toynbee describes another civilization that has lied dormant under Western imperialism, Islam, and describes its role on the main stage to be in opposition to the great Western project of assimilation by force, instead taking the role of fulfilling the vacuum of spirituality left by the technocratic rule. And as Toynbee puts it, Islam remains with a mighty spiritual mission still to carry out. So with this serving as the backdrop of my analysis, I wanted to provide some context on the Islamic and Middle Eastern influences in Dune, references that point to Herbert's purpose in using Islam as the catalyst for Paul's eventual upheaval of social order, and the influence of Toynbee's work on this classic novel.
Extreme temperatures and treacherous weather events make life outside the cities of Arrakis truly hostile.
Beginning with the key to all that is in Dune, spice. Spice is the focal point to all that makes their world move in the same way that oil is the most important resource in the modern world.
For the Fremen, spice is the sacred hallucinogen, which preserves life and brings enormous health benefits. For the Imperium, spice is used by the navigators of the Spacing Guild to find safe paths between the stars. Without spice, interstellar travel is impossible.
The connections are clear, even the pollution that's caused by the use of oil and machinery, and the effect of spice on the human body and environment.
Long exposure to spice has given the tribe their characteristic blue eyes, the eyes of Ibad.
I'm pretty sure if you huff enough gas, you'll also start to see the future too. Paul Atreides and his mother are modeled after the characters of Hagar and Ishmael. This is a story defined in all Abrahamic scripture, with the young mother that's left to fend for her child in a barren desert after Abraham is told to do so by God. Many of the acts of pilgrimage to Mecca pay homage to this desert scene. These pair are saved by the desert-dwelling Arabs of that time,
preferring to inhabit the remotest regions of Arrakis.
Also worthy of note is the line of Ishmael and the Arabs would birth the prophet of Islam, and through his lineage will come the one called Mahdi in Islamic eschatology. The use of Arabic and Islamic terminology also appears throughout the story, terms such as lisan al-ghaib, speaker of the unseen or unseen realities.
Lisan al-Ghaib, voice from the outer world. It's their name for Messiah.
Mahdi, which we described as a savior figure. Mu'addib. In the world of Dune, Paul adopts his name after the resourceful desert mouse, However, in Arabic, it means one who educates others in character or manners, derived from the root word adab, or character. Another tie-in to the mission of the Islamic prophet, which is to perfect good character. And last but not least, the great symbol of the desert of Arrakis, the creature that is referred to as shai hulud, meaning eternal thing, an apt descriptor of the desert and symbolic of the ways of the Fremen and the Bedouins who understand the immateriality of time.
The Fremen share the deep desert with the giant sandworms, known to the Fremen as shai hulud.
The language around Revelation and the visions of Paul Atreides also closely mirror the descriptions of prophecy in Islam, often characterized in two different ways, with the visions coming in the form of a person who relates to them the words in prophecy.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience.
Or in other cases, appearing as an intense and heavy experience, causing them to sweat profusely and collapse under the weight of their visions.
It's like the ringing of a bell, a heavy bell, and the Prophet ﷺ would focus so that he could grasp everything that Jibreel alayhi salam was bringing to him. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she said that the Prophet ﷺ used to sweat when the revelation would come to him, and you could see the beads of sweat coming down his face sallallahu alaihi wasallam even when the weather was cold. He would shiver sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it would grasp his entire presence.
Even the often critiqued style of narration of the novel borrows from elements of the Quran.
Critics and readers seem to both agree. Frank Herbert is not a very good writer.
The omniscient narration style that switches from perspective is one that is commonly found in Quranic structure and utilized to lend itself a timeless nature to its recitation.
It is not subpar. I think that Frank Herbert's writing is very good. I've done some analysis, some close reading of the text.
If you have the time, the patience, and the wherewithal to study the book, you will begin to see these incredibly deep patterns in the book. So it's very much the opposite of in the Western tradition, where books have an outward cohesion, but as you begin to study them deeper, they often fall apart. This is what deconstruction is all about. And the Quran is the opposite. Outwardly, it looks like it doesn't have a cohesion, but as the deeper you study it, the more clear the order comes.
That people read it many times, over and over again, and seem to get more out of it each successive reading, which was what I intended.
Herbert's quote around the impact of human effort on the world could not be truer than in the time of its publishing, with great leaders and orators presenting themselves on the American stage. From John F. Kennedy to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, it was a time of great and radical change in American discourse, and a chance to see these thoughts shape the fabric of his society. To this day, elements of Islamic culture and discoveries pervade our Western society, from Rumi, who is regarded as one of the most widely read poets in the United States, above even Whitman and Dickinson surprisingly, and even in our daily usage, such as the name algorithm, that unseen force that controls all of your viewing pleasure on social media, derived from the name al-Khwarizmi, the Arab scholar. All to say that it is a tangled tapestry of influence and conflict that have shaped the modern discourse of Islam on the public stage, from pre- to postmodern crusades, the most recent of which was enacted by Bible-thumping evangelicals who wanted to bring about the end days through the destruction of the modern Babylon in Iraq. Even in secular wars, the hint of such conflict could be found in instances such as General Gouraud of the French military, who kicked dust upon the grave of Saladin and proclaimed the cross, had finally conquered the crescent during his parade through Damascus after the First World War.
The Christians butchered every Muslim within the walls when they took this city.
I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin.
Dune's critique of the charismatic figurehead, however, takes on another meaning in the eyes of Toynbee, who sees this clash of civilizations as inevitable. Like in the world of Dune, resources lie at the heart of this conflict, and with Islamic civilization splintered since the ruin of the Ottomans, a unifying figure would be the equivalent of a Paul Atreides. Not to say that the cult of personality is exclusive to Muslims, with figures like Charles Manson or Jim Jones often used as examples by Herbert when discussing the negative impact of these charismatic figures.
and you can have the Kool-Aid concession. I mean, Jim Jones is a marvelous example of how nasty a sick leader can become and how that sickness can infect the people who follow.
A great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it, and he answers.
However, from the perspective of Toynbee, this character in the grander sense would embody the spirit of fraternity he speaks of in Civilization on Trial, when he asks, can mankind afford to do without the social cement of Islamic fraternity?
Now you may be shocked by these words, but I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and prayed to the same God with fellow Muslims whose eyes were blue, whose hair was blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And we were all brothers, truly. People of all colors and races believing in one God and one humanity.
There is no worldly impetus for Muslims' admiration or outrage. Their action isn't spurred by a lack of jobs or a fear of replacement. From Salman Rushdie to Charlie Hebdo, the West is dealing with a society that still wholeheartedly believes in prophecy.
The maker of the deep desert. When you have lived with prophecy for so long, the moment of revelation is a shock.
Rarely do you see the level of conviction to a religious figure that Muslims embody toward their prophet. And the more antagonism is raised by the West, the stronger the level of zealotry to meet its challenge.
I was thinking that in this weird way, 9/11 made me more Muslim. Because I was told it was my fault. I was told that the most horrible thing that I had ever seen happen to this day was because of who I was, where I came from, the language that I speak, and my faith. And I had to find out if that was true. So I looked into it. And I realized not only was that not true, but this was something that I really wanted to be a part of my life. I started praying, I started fasting, I started doing all these things that I might not have done. Like if 9/11 didn't happen, I might have just been like, yeah, my dad's from Egypt, at the bacon.
And this reality is jarring for children of the Enlightenment. Portrayal of Muslims in Western media continue to strengthen that feeling of otherness, even in depictions where other minorities or cultures are displayed in a positive light. From the representation of extremists in the first Marvel film Iron Man, in which a terrorist cell is taken advantage of by a Western billionaire in order to secure power and wealth for himself.
Box of scraps!
Or even in the powerfully diverse Black Panther, which showcases Islam through a Boko Haram-like group who are trafficking young girls through Africa. These are the only portrayals of Muslims in the MCU until Kamala Khan hit the scene as Ms. Marvel. Even in Lord of the Rings, the Eastern folk are presented as fallen to the command of Sauron as they make their way toward the battlefield, turbaned and riding on elephants. In all fairness to Tolkien, he did revise the effectiveness of the Blue Wizards later on, giving them a backstory much more akin to the historical interpretation of Islam as a heretical wing of Christendom. This is all without mentioning the myriad of terrorist depictions since 9/11. The Muslim world maintains this otherness to the Western mind.
Every Muslim is a terrorist. Period. Right now. Shut your mouth. I don't want to hear you. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you think. You can smile at me. You can say whatever you want. Right now, what we looking at this is evil. A Muslim is evil.
Raising money for terrorists, and I want it to stop.
They follow their old master's rules, mandatory attendance. That's hearkening love out there.
It doesn't fit into boxes that are formed and reformed under pivotal events in its philosophical narrative, such as the Renaissance, Enlightenment, post-structuralism, and modernist thought. For the West, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing man he doesn't exist. For Muslims, it might be convincing them of another well-meaning Lawrence of Arabia, or in the parallel case of the Fremen, of Paul Atreides. The Fremen who in Dune possess qualities that could be described as a classically noble savage, like descriptors used by early colonialists to the Native Americans.
And there are hundreds of sieges.
Millions of Fremen. You were right.
And I gotta tell you, I've never come so close to dying. There's no finer fighter in the Imperium. They fight like demons.
Desert power.
In Dune, it's Duncan Idaho who praises their commendable character and qualities to the deaf ears of the House of Atreides.
The loyal. They're attuned to the desert. Part of it. It's part of them. You wait till you see it. It's beautiful out there.
Does it surprise you, Mr. Bentley? Surely you know the Arabs are a barbarous people. Barbarous and cruel. Who but they? Who but they?
Who, although more diplomatic than their merciless Harkonnen counterparts, wish to exploit these native lands all the same.
You are outworlders. You come here for the spice, you take it, giving nothing in return.
That's true. And that has been the nature of the West in relation to its reflection in the East. These competing civilizations that have followed completely different paths to modernity. One that is now stifled and dormant, like the sandworm of Arrakis.
Little else is known of the Fremen, except that they are dangerous and unreliable. Fremen attacks make spice harvesting extremely hazardous.
I guess everybody who sells dope is like, nah, see, but what I'm gonna do, it's like, okay, well, you know, the dope game is cursed and so is the dope.
From Brexit and the rise of xenophobia in England in response to the immigration of Muslims, in large part due to the destabilization of the Middle East by Western forces, to France's continued crackdown on Islamic symbols such as the hijab, again affecting people brought into their country because of colonialist expansion in northern Africa. The once aromatic melting pot looks to have long since passed its boiling point, and the West has no willingness to square the circle because it does not want to understand this community. Rather, it would prefer to subject, indoctrinate, or use, just like the Bene Gesserit, and just like Paul Atreides. And these Muslims, as backwards as they are to the modern West, and in the world of Dune, have maintained semblance of their values throughout the centuries. This in fact being where their power lies.
Should we remove them? Save the water?
No. These are sacred. Old dream.
As Toynbee puts it almost 80 years ago, Westerners who are mentally still slumbering have now to realize that our neighbor's past is going to become a vital part of our Western future.
But because it happened, all this fear happened too. And it elected the dude that we have. And it's not good. Like, even the people who voted for him are kind of like, ugh. He's dismantling the courts. No one knows what he's going to do next, even the people in his own party. He's making us weak. But the way I feel about how I believe and my faith, that's how all my friends are. And so it's like, Islam is stronger and America is weaker, all because of this one thing. And so the thought I had was, did 9/11 work?
When the West's greatest export is culture, what does it mean for those who fight against its currents of influence? Like the Fremen who, irrespective of which house occupies them, Harkonnen or Atreides, do not lose sight of the ultimate truth of the desert. And that truth in Dune is characterized by the creature known as shai hulud, the eternal thing. This is the answer of the Fremen to their occupiers, that the reign of Harkonnen and Atreides is but for a short time, not even a wrinkle in the skin of the sandworm.
I'm not here to take your part. Arrakis has seen men like you come and go.
You know, as the Hopi chief said famously in one of his exchanges, he said, we were told that America was the thing that we would see come and go. So this idea of permanence via brute force is just not historically supported. And if you doubt it, well, then you go to any museum of antiquity and see where all of the thugging gets the thugs.
This is the answer to the question posed by Stilgar of the Fremen to his new oppressors. He wants to make clear that they don't fall into blanket camps, defined by their oppressors who would discard them for spice. And in our world, these Muslims who see themselves in the victims of the foreign policy of nations that would sooner bomb their brothers and sisters into oblivion without much afterthought. Whereas the compassion, the civility for those who have been deemed other in order to appease a troubled heart. In this binary winged world of the West, Muslims, and thus Islam, have remained flightless. But perhaps being grounded is a perspective necessary to surviving the growing turbulence in this shifting environment. Perhaps constancy is an antidote to whatever inconsequential flavor of the day outrage is poking the hornet's nest of social media. Outrage that distracts and deters from the focus on the human dimension, the eternal dimension. And in the same way that desert stretch remains unchanged, no matter what footprints may once stamp themselves like flagposts, be they beggar or king, we will see empires come and go. All that matters is preserving our humanity in the struggle.